5:30 a.m., July 31st, 2022. Strongsville, Ohio. A surveillance camera captures a Toyota Camry driving down Progress Drive. The car is moving slowly, controlled. The driver, a 17-year-old girl named Mackenzie Shirilla, is behind the wheel. Her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, 20, is in the passenger seat. His friend, Davion Flanagan, 19, is in the back. The car turns onto a dead-end street. And then everything changes. The car accelerates rapidly, from 35 miles per hour to 100 miles per hour in seconds. It does not slow down. It does not brake. It drives straight toward a brick building at the end of the street. And at 100 miles per hour, it slams into the wall. The impact is catastrophic. The car crumples. The airbags deploy. All three occupants are unconscious, not breathing, trapped inside. When first responders arrive minutes later, Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan are already dead. Mackenzie Shirilla is barely alive. And 1 year later, after a 4-day trial, a judge will call her hell on wheels and sentence her to life in prison. This is the story of Mackenzie Shirilla, from teen to inmate, and what her life looks like behind bars. Before we break down the crash, the trial, the evidence, and what life is like for a teenage girl serving life in an adult women's prison, subscribe right now. This video is educational. It explains how teen murder cases work, what life with parole eligibility actually means, and the reality of prison for someone who committed murder at 17. Hit like. Drop a comment. Do you think Mackenzie Shirilla is guilty? Let's start with who she was. Mackenzie Shirilla was born in 2004. She grew up in Strongsville, Ohio, a quiet suburb of Cleveland. Middle class. Safe. Good schools. She had 2 parents. A stable home. No history of abuse. No history of violence. She was, by all accounts, an ordinary teenager. She attended Strongsville High School. She had friends. She had a boyfriend, Dominic Russo. They had been dating on and off for 3 or 4 years. According to his family, the relationship was toxic. They fought constantly. They broke up often. And Mackenzie, according to testimony from Dominic's brother Angelo, was controlling, possessive, violent. Angelo testified that he witnessed a lot of negative behavior from her to my brother. That Mackenzie wasn't fair to Dominic. That the relationship pushed Angelo away because he couldn't stand watching how she treated his brother. And according to prosecutors, Mackenzie once threatened to crash her car with Dominic inside it, which is exactly what she did on July 31st, 2022. Dominic Russo's family described the relationship as volatile. Dominic's mother, Christine Russo, testified that the couple fought, that threats were made. Dominic's brother said they broke up constantly. And Dominic's sister, also named Christine, said that while she didn't witness the fights herself, she heard from Dominic's friends that it wasn't a surprise to a lot of people based off her behavior and how she was. Mackenzie had spent most of the relationship living at Dominic's house. She was part of the family, but the relationship was deteriorating. And in the weeks before the crash, things got worse. Prosecutors would later argue that Mackenzie made the decision to end the relationship permanently by driving into a wall at 100 miles per hour. With Dominic in the passenger seat, and Davion Flanagan, an innocent bystander, a friend, in the back. At 5:30 a.m. on July 31st, 2022, Mackenzie Shirilla was driving her Toyota Camry down Progress Drive in Strongsville. Dominic Russo was in the passenger seat. Davion Flanagan was in the back. Surveillance footage shows the car moving at a normal speed. And then, at a specific point, the car accelerates rapidly. The speed increases from 35 miles per hour to 100 miles per hour. The car does not brake. It drives straight toward the Plidco building, a brick structure at the end of a dead-end street. And at 5:30 a.m., it slams into the wall at 100 miles per hour. The crash is so violent that all 3 occupants are rendered unconscious immediately. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan die at the scene. Mackenzie Shirilla is critically injured but survives. When police and paramedics arrive, they find the car destroyed. The front end completely crumpled, the airbags deployed, and 2 young men dead. Initially, the crash was treated as a tragic accident. A young driver. Early morning. Maybe she fell asleep. Maybe she was distracted. But as investigators began examining the evidence, a different picture emerged. The car's event data recorder, the black box, was recovered. And it told a story that contradicted the accident theory. The data showed that in the seconds before impact, Mackenzie's right foot was pressed down on the accelerator pedal to its full extent. 100% throttle. And the brake pedal was never applied. Not once. The car had no mechanical defects. No steering failure. No brake failure. Nothing that would explain the crash. And investigators found something else. Psilocybin mushrooms. And a digital scale. In the car. In Mackenzie's possession. This was not an accident. This was intentional. Hold on. Before we go inside the trial, I need you to subscribe if you haven't already. Because what happens next, the evidence, the judge's ruling, and the sentence, is the part that shows you how the justice system handles teenagers who commit murder. Drop a comment. Do you think 17-year-olds should be tried as adults? Keep watching. Mackenzie Shirilla spent months in the hospital recovering from her injuries. And when she was finally discharged, police were waiting. On November 4, 2022, more than 3 months after the crash, Mackenzie was arrested. She was charged with 17 crimes, including 2 counts of aggravated murder. Bodycam footage of the arrest, released in 2025, shows an officer handcuffing Mackenzie as she cries. She is then placed in the back of a police cruiser. And the bodycam footage shows something strange. As she is being transported to jail, Mackenzie closes her eyes. She leans back, and she appears to be trying to relax. Calm. Composed. Not the behavior of someone who just learned they are being charged with murdering their boyfriend and his friend. Mackenzie's lawyer, James McDonnell, made a strategic decision. He chose a bench trial, not a jury trial. In a bench trial, the judge, not a jury, determines guilt. This was a gamble. Juries can be swayed by emotion, by sympathy, by a young girl crying on the stand. Judges are harder to manipulate. But McDonnell believed the evidence was weak, that the prosecution could not prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt. He was wrong. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution presented the surveillance footage, the event data, recorder data, testimony from Dominic's family about the toxic relationship, and testimony from witnesses about Mackenzie's behavior after the crash. The defense argued that Mackenzie did not remember the crash, that she was in shock, that there was no proof she intended to kill anyone. The judge, Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, did not buy it. On August 14, 2023, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo delivered her verdict. Guilty. On all 12 charges. 4 counts of murder. 4 counts of felonious assault. 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide. 1 count of drug possession. 1 count of possessing criminal tools. Judge Russo did not hold back. This was not reckless driving, she said. This was murder. She described Mackenzie as morphing from a responsible driver to literal hell on wheels as she makes her way down the street. She said Mackenzie had a mission and she executed it with precision. The phrase hell on wheels became the defining description of Mackenzie Shirilla. It was picked up by media outlets. It became the title of documentaries. And it stuck. Because the evidence supported it. Mackenzie drove that car into a wall on purpose. To kill Dominic. And Davion, an innocent passenger, died too. On August 21, 2023, the sentencing hearing began. The families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan spoke. Christine Russo, Dominic's mother, addressed Mackenzie directly. Mackenzie, going to prison because you did this. Be thankful you're still alive and have a future, whatever that may be. Dom and Davion were robbed of their futures, their hopes and their dreams. Davion Flanagan, Davion's sister, asked the court to give Mackenzie the longest possible sentence. Mackenzie spoke too, crying, reading from a prepared statement. To the families of Dom and Davion, I am so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see how I'd never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion. We were all friends, and Dom was my soulmate. Judge Russo sentenced Mackenzie to 2 concurrent life sentences. 1 for murdering Dominic. 1 for murdering Davion, with eligibility for parole after 15 years. She also permanently suspended Mackenzie's driver's license. Mackenzie Shirilla, 19 years old, would spend the next 15 years minimum in prison. And if the parole board denied her release in 2038, she could spend the rest of her life there. Real quick, if you're still watching, you need to subscribe. Because what happens next, where Mackenzie is now what life is like at Ohio Reformatory for women, and what 15 to life actually means, is the part that explains the reality of a life sentence. Comment below. Should she be eligible for parole? Now, back to the prison. Mackenzie Shirilla is currently incarcerated at Ohio Reformatory for women in Marysville, Ohio. ORW is a maximum and medium security prison for women. It houses approximately 2,000 inmates, some serving short sentences for nonviolent crimes, some serving decades for serious felonies, and some, like Mackenzie, serving life sentences for murder. ORW is not the worst prison in Ohio, but it is not easy. The facility has been criticized for overcrowding, for inadequate mental health services, for violence between inmates. Mackenzie is 20 years old. She is one of the youngest inmates in the facility, and she will remain there until at least 2038, if she is paroled. If not, she will die there. Mackenzie's sentence is 2 concurrent life sentences with eligibility for parole after 15 years. Here is what that means. She must serve a minimum of 15 years before she can appear before the parole board. That minimum expires in 2038. She was 17 at the time of the crime. She will be 32 years old at her first parole hearing. The parole board will review her case. They will consider her behavior in prison, her participation in rehabilitation programs, whether she has expressed remorse, whether she poses a danger to society, and the recommendations of the victims' families. If the parole board grants parole, she is released, with conditions, supervision, restrictions, a permanent criminal record. If the parole board denies parole, she remains in prison, and she can reapply for parole at intervals determined by the board. Some inmates appear before the parole board every year, some every 5 years, and some, if the parole board believes they will never be safe to release, are denied parole indefinitely. Mackenzie could spend the rest of her life in prison, or she could be released at 32. It depends entirely on the parole board. Life at Ohio Reformatory for women follows a strict routine. Wake up is at 6 a.m. Breakfast is served in the dining hall. Inmates return to their cells or housing units. Work assignments or programming begins at 8 a.m. Some inmates work in the prison kitchen. Some work in maintenance. Some attend education programs, GED classes, vocational training. Lunch is at 11:30 a.m. Afternoon programming or work continues until 4 p.m. Dinner is at 5 p.m. Recreation time, if allowed, is from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Lockdown is at 9 p.m. Lights out at 10 p.m. This is Mackenzie's life. Every day, for at least 15 years. Possibly forever. Mackenzie's legal team has filed multiple appeals. The first appeal, filed on September 25, 2023, argued that there was insufficient evidence to support the conviction, that the judge made clerical errors during the trial. The 8th District Court of Appeals reviewed the case, and on September 26, 2024, they upheld the conviction. The appeals court found that the evidence was sufficient, that the judge did not commit reversible errors, and that Mackenzie's convictions were supported by the facts. Mackenzie's lawyers filed a second appeal to the Ohio Supreme Court. On April 30, 2025, the Ohio Supreme Court declined to review the case. The conviction stands. Mackenzie Shirilla is a convicted double murderer, and all legal avenues have been exhausted. The families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan have had different responses to the case. Davion Flanagan family supported the conviction and the life sentence. His mother, Jamie Flanagan, told reporters after the verdict, "There's not a day that goes by that we don't miss our son, and justice was served for him today." His sister, Davion, asked for the longest possible sentence. But Dominic Russo's family, despite their grief, expressed ambivalence. Frank Russo, Dominic's father, told NBC News, "It's horrible for everybody. Yeah, I lost my son, it's harder on our family, but I don't want the rest of her life ruined too. It isn't going to make me feel any better." He described Mackenzie as just a little kid who fucked up and did a damn stupid thing. He said he wished there was a way she could get help instead of spending decades in prison. This is the complexity of the case. Even the victim's father, the man who lost his son, does not want Mackenzie to spend her life in prison. I want to stop here and address something directly. Mackenzie Shirilla killed 2 people. The evidence is overwhelming. The event data recorder, the surveillance footage, the judge's ruling. She accelerated to 100 miles per hour and drove into a wall. On purpose. And 2 young men died. There is no ambiguity about that. But here is what makes this case difficult. Mackenzie was 17 years old. Her brain was not fully developed. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control, decision-making, and understanding consequences, does not finish developing until age 25. That does not excuse what she did, but it explains why teenagers make catastrophically bad decisions, why they act impulsively, why they do not fully comprehend the permanence of death. And it raises the question, should we sentence a 17-year-old to life in prison? Because that sentence assumes that the person who committed the crime at 17 is the same person who will sit in prison at 30, at 40, at 50. And neuroscience tells us that is not true. The brain changes. People change. So the question is not, did she do it? The question is, what do we do with a child who commits murder? During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors presented TikTok videos of Mackenzie. The videos were filmed after the crash. One showed her at a concert. Another showed her celebrating Halloween, dancing, smiling, having fun. The prosecution used these videos to argue that Mackenzie showed no remorse, that she was living her life while Dominic and Davion were dead. Mackenzie's mother, Natalie Shirilla, pushed back. She told the court that those outings were the only time she did something for herself, that Mackenzie had been holed up in her room crying next to a shrine she had made of Dominic Russo for months, that the videos did not tell the full story, but the damage was done. The videos became evidence of Mackenzie's lack of remorse, and they reinforced the prosecution's narrative that she killed Dominic on purpose and felt nothing. Throughout the trial and sentencing, Mackenzie maintained that she did not remember the crash. "I wish I could remember what happened," she said in her sentencing statement. "I would never let this happen or do it on purpose." This claim that she has no memory of the crash is difficult to verify. Post-traumatic amnesia is real. People who suffer severe head trauma can lose memories of the event. But the timing of Mackenzie's claim raises questions. She did not mention amnesia immediately after the crash. She did not mention it during her recovery. She only claimed she could not remember after she was charged with murder. And Frank Russo, Dominic's father, told NBC News, "I don't buy her claims that she doesn't remember the crash." Whether Mackenzie genuinely has no memory or whether this is a defense strategy, we will never know for certain. Mackenzie Shirilla's first parole hearing is scheduled for September 2038. She will be 32 years old. She will have served 15 years in prison. At the hearing, the parole board will review her case. They will ask, has she participated in rehabilitation programs? Has she expressed genuine remorse? Does she pose a danger to society? What do the victims' families recommend? The board will make a decision, grant parole, deny parole, or defer the decision and schedule another hearing. If parole is granted, Mackenzie will be released under strict conditions. Supervision, restrictions on where she can live, restrictions on who she can contact, a permanent felony record, No driver's license. Ever. If parole is denied, she remains in prison. And the question is asked again. In 2040, or 2045, or 2050, until she is either released or dies in prison. Mackenzie Shirilla is not unique. Every year, teenagers in the United States are convicted of murder. Some are sentenced as juveniles. Some, like Mackenzie, are sentenced as adults. According to the Sentencing Project, approximately 2,000 people are currently serving life sentences for crimes they committed as juveniles. Most of them, over 70%, are people of color. Most of them, over 60%, were convicted of murder. And most of them, according to research, will never reoffend if released. Because the same brain development that made them impulsive and dangerous at 17 makes them capable of change by 30. This is the paradox. The people most likely to commit murder are teenagers, and the people least likely to reoffend are adults who were once teenagers. So we sentence them to life. And by the time they are mature enough to never commit another crime, they have already spent decades in prison. Mackenzie Shirilla's case has become a media phenomenon. Multiple documentaries have been made. A podcast titled Hell on Wheels on YouTube. A court TV documentary. A Killer Cases episode on Channel 4 and Apple TV. An investigation Discovery Special in 2025. The case has been analyzed, dissected, turned into content. And Mackenzie, whether she wants it or not, has become famous. Not for anything she accomplished, but for what she destroyed. Her face is on thumbnail images. Her story is told and retold. And millions of people watch, forming opinions, debating guilt, debating the sentence. And Mackenzie, sitting in a cell at Ohio Reformatory for Women, has no control over any of it. Here is what I want you to understand about this case. Mackenzie Shirilla is real. She is not a character in a true crime documentary. She is a 20-year-old woman sitting in a prison cell. She killed 2 people. That is a fact. But she is also a human being. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of her sentence? Is it punishment? If so, 15 years in prison is brutal punishment. She will lose her youth, her freedom, her future. Is it deterrence? Because life sentences for teenagers do not deter other teenagers. The teenage brain does not think about consequences. That is why they commit these crimes in the first place. Is it rehabilitation? Because if it is, then we should be asking, what programs is she participating in? What therapy is she receiving? What is being done to ensure that when she is released, if she is released, she is not the same person who drove into that wall at 100 miles per hour? Or is it just revenge? Because if we are honest, that is what a lot of people want. They want her to suffer. They want her to pay. They want her locked away forever. And if that is what we want, then we should at least be honest about it. This is not justice. This is vengeance. And there is a difference. Dominic Russo was 20 years old when he died. He was described by his family as a go-getter. He loved basketball. He was opening his own clothing line. He was driven. He had a future. Davion Flanagan was 19 years old. He was Dominic's friend. He loved fashion. From a young age, he was particular about his shoes and socks. He was a doting uncle to his sister's kids. In every picture, he's hugging and kissing the kids, his sister said. He loved them so much. Both families created memorials. Dominic's family holds him in their hearts. Davion's family created the Davion Flanagan Memorial Scholarship, providing educational support to aspiring barbers in his honor. These were real people, with families, with futures. And they are gone. Because a 17-year-old girl made a decision in a moment of rage or despair or calculation. And 2 lives ended. As of 2026, Mackenzie Shirilla is 21 years old. She is incarcerated at Ohio Reformatory for Women. She has served 3 years of her 15 to life sentence. She has 12 more years minimum before her first parole hearing. All of her appeals have been exhausted. The conviction stands. The sentence stands. And unless the parole board grants her release in 2038, she will spend the next several decades in prison. Her case continues to be covered in documentaries. Her name continues to trend on social media. And the debate continues. Is she a cold-blooded murderer who deserves life in prison? Or is she a child who made a catastrophic mistake and deserves a second chance? The answer, depending on who you ask, varies. I want to end this video with a question. If you were on the parole board in 2038, if Mackenzie Shirilla appeared before you, having served 15 years in prison, and asked to be released, what would you do? Would you grant parole or deny it? Because that is the question the board will face. And the answer is not simple. On one hand, she killed 2 people, deliberately. The evidence is clear. On the other hand, she will be 32 years old in 2038. She will have spent 15 years in prison, her entire adult life. And the person sitting in front of the parole board will not be the same person who drove into that wall at 17. The brain changes. People change. And if we believe in rehabilitation, if we believe that the purpose of prison is not just punishment, but transformation, then we have to ask, at what point has she paid enough? I do not have the answer. But I know this. The parole board in 2038 will have to decide. And whatever they decide, it will not bring Dominic Russo or Davion Flanagan back. It will just determine what happens to the third life destroyed that morning, Mackenzie Shirilla's. On July 31st, 2022, Mackenzie Shirilla accelerated her Toyota Camry to 100 miles per hour and drove it into a brick wall. Her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his friend, Davion Flanagan, died. Mackenzie survived. 1 year later, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 15 years. She is currently incarcerated at Ohio Reformatory for women. She will remain there until at least 2038, and possibly for the rest of her life. This case raises questions about teen culpability, about life sentences, about what justice actually means. If you want to understand how the justice system handles other teen murder cases, check out my video on juveniles sentenced to life without parole. Link on screen. Subscribe because I explain complex legal cases with accuracy and respect. And comment below. Should Mackenzie Shirilla be eligible for parole in 2038? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.